Get it sorted early.
I don't pick up a pen and think, gosh, what am I doing?
You have got to stop asking children to build a house before they can secure the bricks.
Welcome back to the English Teacher Feature podcast, in which I, Sam Denno, and my co-host Nicola Romaine are talking through the 2025 writing framework. We've been going through section 1, which is about the importance of writing in general, and we've been picking off each individual subsection and deconstructing it. Between us, we have specialisms across primary and secondary phases, and we aim to bring interesting insights and ideas for professional development along the way. Last time we chatted, we looked at the model student who is described in the What Proficient Writers Can Do subsection, Jamal, and we discussed his pathway to becoming a strong writer. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about the struggle of writing and considering another example student, Sophie, in Y6, who's had much more difficulty in picking up the skills she needs to write competently. As with Jamal, that writing framework takes us through her experiences up to year 6 and then looks ahead to what she might expect as she enters secondary school. As we've said before, I'm coming at this framework from a secondary teacher perspective, and boy do I have all sorts of questions for Nicola on the Sophie story. With her primary specialism, I'm hoping that Nicola can fill in a whole load of the gaps here. Are you feeling confident, Nicola?
I am. Looking forward to the conversation, as always, Sam.
To begin with, the framework references Ronald Kellogg's book, The Psychology of Writing, in which he proposes that to plan, compose, and then rewrite a piece of text is doubly as cognitively challenging as reading a complex text. Why do you suppose that is, Nicola?
It all comes down to the direction of travel, really, Sam. You know, reading is essentially a decoding, as we know, and recognition task. That architecture is already built on the page, isn't it? And your brain is navigating that. But writing, as we know, is encoding, and you're creating something from nothing. So to write a single sentence, a child's brain has got to simultaneously juggle that high-level composition, what am I trying to say, what vocabulary should I use, and low-level transcription. So that sort of technical skill. So how do I spell? Blah-de-blah. Where does the pencil go next? Really difficult to do both of those things at the same time. It's like trying to compose a symphony while, you know, physically building the piano at the same time, really. You know, the working memory simply can't cope, simply red lines in that respect. And I think when we talk about this, for me personally, it's like becomes more and more astounding, really, that we expect children, that we have historically expected children, me, myself as a teacher, to be able to do this. Juggle all these things all at the same time. It's just nuts.
Is that because we didn't have the science before, the cognitive science, to understand how difficult a challenge this was?
Yeah, but definitely. And that's what's so brilliant, isn't it, about the writing framework and all of the research that's fed into the writing framework, and even the research that wasn't able to go into the writing framework as well. There's so much out there, isn't there? But I think, you know, we just come back to this cognition, don't we? You know, the cognitive aspect of it. And yeah, I think there's that working memory element is just everything, isn't it?
Yeah.
Without considering that as a teacher, you're kind of failing before you even start when it comes to writing.
So the interesting thing about Sophie is that she is a good reader, we're told, and she has a wide vocabulary. So in terms of how she presents as she enters year 7, her teachers might not expect her to struggle with writing. So pre-reception, we're told that her fine motor skills were less developed than her core strength. Why would those fine motor skills not develop in the childhood early years? Is that just a lack of experiences, or is it a natural difference between children? What's going on there?
I think it's actually a bit of both, Sam. But you know, in primary, you know, we are seeing a massive shift. So fine motor skills don't happen by accident. You know, they're built through muscle memory. So if a toddler spends more time swiping a tablet screen than pinching Play-Doh or doing those really kind of like, you know, recommended fine motor exercises, or using scissors or climbing, those intrinsic hand muscles simply don't develop at the same rate as their core physical strength. So, you know, thinking about early years practice and why, you know, in early years settings there's such a focus on those fine motor skills. Here we go, this is why, you know, this is what it's leading to, this is why it's so important. And of course those things can be done, you know, at home as well, you know, things like pegging out the washing on the washing line, you know, those kind of anything that you know that requires that kind of fine motor element to it is very, very beneficial later on to that child's writing fluency. And you know, by the time a child like Sophie reaches reception, she's already starting on the back foot, really, physically. You know, if we don't explicitly teach her how to hold a pencil, that grip becomes awkward and painful and exhausting. And then what we're seeing obviously now in Key Stage 3 is, you know, is pupils who physically struggle to hold a pencil properly, and how uncomfortable, you know, it is. That's completely taking away cognitively from their ability to be able to comfortably apply their ideas to the page.
Are we seeing more of that?
I don't know if we're seeing more of it, or whether it's we recognise that more. I was speaking to a Key Stage 3 colleague actually the other day who was talking about this and saying, you know, what do we do? You know, we're now going around and we're noticing that the child that's holding their pen like that, or, you know, like that, really uncomfortably, this is a real blocker, and that's nobody's fault. It's just the fact that this has been highlighted to us now, isn't it? So I don't know whether it's more. I think probably there are more pupils, because the teaching of handwriting hasn't been maybe consistent from an early age. So of course the writing framework advises that we teach handwriting from reception, and this is why. Let's get it sorted early. You know, let's build that muscle memory as soon as we possibly can. Let's put those things in place, and then by the time they go into Key Stage 2 and then obviously into Key Stage 3, it's completely automatic. There's no blockers and barriers, there's no pain, there's no discomfort. You know, we're not thinking about undoing that kind of incorrect pencil grip. It makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Actually, on top of that, we've also got the National Literacy Trust survey telling us there are fewer people writing for pleasure. So that would also seem to evidence the fact
Why
that...
would you want to write for pleasure, though, if it's a really uncomfortable thing to do?
Yeah, well, it's not a pleasure then, is it?
Put yourself in that position as well. I mean, I put my own self. You know, we work very much, don't we, online, on computers, we're typing all the time. When you actually... And I love writing, actually. I love putting pen to paper. I love the art form of it. I love the feeling of it. I love
physically as opposed to typing.
Physically. And I think the generation of ideas for me, when I actually put pen to paper, is a far nicer and you know, effective process than when I'm actually typing. But it's quite uncomfortable. When you sort of, you know, out of practice, I think it can be quite an uncomfortable thing to do.
But yeah, I mean, you saying that as well, though, it actually, again, because we are competent writers, I don't pick up a pen and think, oh gosh, what am I doing? there is a flow, isn't there? Like, it's the creative flow. It just comes from your head and it just goes down through your pen, and creative language and metaphors or whatever else.
From your fingertips, doesn't it?
Yeah. And to think that some people have got that blocker, that it's that where the burden is here and they can't get it down to there. Back to Sophie. So phonics in reception and into key stage 1, but then she keeps on getting caught out by other things. She could have done with the phonics teaching going on for a bit longer because her spelling of complex letter patterns isn't fully developed, but she also struggles with the fine motor skills, and this is exacerbated because she receives no explicit handwriting instruction. And it all begins to feel like a catalogue of errors as we read it on the page. But I suppose I'm watching all of this from my secondary teacher vantage point. Is it difficult to pick up on all of these things, the phonics, the handwriting, the motor skills, when it's not neatly written down in a writing framework for us to pick over?
It's incredibly difficult, Sam, in a busy classroom, isn't it? It's easy to look at a case study and see sort of a catalogue of errors, but in reality, those gaps can happen really silently, can't they? Particularly, if a child is quiet, big class of 30, the child behaves well, can read beautifully. They don't set off those traditional red flags, I guess. So she's not failing her phonics screening, and there, and it is a fine line between, obviously, as with everything, passing and failing a statutory assessment. She's just missing those advanced, more complex spelling patterns, which aren't necessarily tested in the phonics screening check. You don't have to be able to have embedded those in order to pass it. So that's an issue there. Her handwriting isn't illegible. It's just incredibly slow. So without universal screening that looks specifically at writing fluency, these kinds of pupils, children, slip through the cracks every single day because their struggles are quiet, and they just kind of they're doing just enough, aren't they?
And as you say, it's maybe not entirely visible. Does her competence, so she carries on into key stage 2 and continues to read well enough, is that one of the things that potentially masks her weaker skills in writing?
I think it's a great illusion of the primary classroom, really. Her reading absolutely masks her writing. And because she has a rich vocabulary and understands complex texts, the teachers might often assume that knowledge automatically transfers to her hand. And I think this is something that we've probably all been guilty of. Myself as a teacher, I always taught a lot more reading than writing. Reading is passive recognition, whereas writing is active retrieval, isn't it? Sophie, she can read the words because her brain recognises the visual shape of those words, if you like. But when she tries to write that same word, she has to retrieve that exact phoneme mapping from scratch. And if that isn't automatic, and it's that word automaticity again, that link breaks down. So reading feeds writing ideas, but it doesn't automate the physical mechanics of writing, does it? That's the blocker.
So now the problem is that Sophie has all of these ideas in her head, her sort of composition ideas, and if we think back to that simple view of writing model, and it posits transcription and composition on that XY axis, she would be capable of composing a really good piece of writing, but she's held back by that transcription, that pen to paper, that muscle memory, and the cognitive load is just too great. So she ends up writing down very simple ideas in spite of her verbal skills and in spite of her reading skills. And although Sophie is generally talkative, we're told that during writing activities she's reserved. Is that a self-esteem thing, or is this more likely to be a cognitive overload thing?
I think it's pure cognitive overload. Her brain is working so hard to spell the words and physicalize the letters that are in her head that she's mentally exhausted. And then, over time, that overload breeds that psychological defense mechanism, doesn't it? That self-esteem, self-confidence, how she perceives herself as a writer isn't great, is it? She looks around, she sees her peers, writing loads, flying down the page, if you like, and she looks at her own sort of three messy in her own thoughts, sentences. She knows her ideas are better than what's on the paper. So she shuts down really to avoid failure. She becomes reserved because it's safer to write a simple sentence that she knows she can spell. So she's kind of like capping her own potential in a way, isn't she? Rather than risking one that might not be right, if you like.
It's alarming, isn't it? She almost trapped by by her pen, trapped by what she can actually output. Because she knows all of this stuff up there, but she's sort of held back by what can come through onto the paper. So as we arrive at the end of year 6, we have this picture of a child who can read and talk confidently, but writes slowly and untidily in simple sentences. Encouragingly, the framework tells us that when she does receive additional support, she does make improvements, but when this isn't available, then she only makes limited progress. And the problem with this is that she's just about to go up into secondary school, where the possibility of that focused attention from one teacher, that's just going to get lost in the mix of a huge timetable. Is there anything that could have been done during the primary years to mitigate these issues that Sophie has had?
So we have to treat handwriting and sentence level mechanics as non-negotiables, not add-ons. So that takes me back to myself as a teacher and what I would do differently now, I guess, as well. So if she had received 10 minutes of explicit daily handwriting instruction in Key Stage 1, and if we'd capped her writing expectations at one perfect sentence rather than a whole page story, which is what the expectation used to be, I think. The more you write, the better you are at writing, if you like. In year 3, we would have protected her working memory. So we have got to stop asking children to build a house before they can secure the bricks.
So as Sophie enters secondary, so we got to year 7, we would hope that benchmarking in English will quickly identify the fact that she's an intelligent pupil who lacks confidence with her transcription skills. So what methods are effective from year 7? We could start with breaking down complex writing tasks, so starting at that basic sentence level and building up to sentences, complex sentences, paragraphs slowly. So moving from that transcription to the composition thing slowly. Encouraging pupils like Sophie to take time composing these things on the page. Oracy can be invaluable in the process and would be something that would really suit Sophie given her verbal communication skills. We can encourage pupils to compose sentences via speech, and when I say compose, I mean in inverted commas. They're not actually writing sentences, they're doing it in speech, slowly transferring those sentences to a mini whiteboard maybe, or writing them down as a draft before turning them into neat work further down a routine, just easing that cognitive load and not asking so much of a pupil's working memory.
The power of oracy as a scaffold, that oral rehearsal, the framework explicitly states that if a pupil can't say a sentence, they can't write it. So for Sophie, who has strong verbal skills, speech is her greatest asset, so we play into that, using oracy to audition sentences out loud is a highly effective cognitive strategy, which is really going to support her, and it's going to give her that motivation and self-esteem as well, isn't it? That we see herself as a writer. When she speaks a sentence, she completely bypasses the physical strain of handwriting and that visual strain of spelling. Her working memory is 100% free to focus on vocabulary and syntax. And then, once she has spoken a complex sentence fluently, she's created that mental blueprint of it, which acts as a stabilizing guide for her working memory. When she finally picks up a pen, it's there. She's noted it.
I think with oracy, Sophie's got the ability. She can talk these sentences out. She's got these ideas in her head. I think what I suppose secondary teachers need to be aware of is that oracy, talking in groups, constructing sentence in groups, scaffolding ideas, sort of planning in groups, that speaking side of it, we need to be explicit about the fact that we are doing the composition there and then via the speaking. It is not merely a precursor to writing, it is the composition. And when Sophie can understand that, when pupils can understand that, then again that's another thing that will bring them confidence, isn't it? That they are getting their opportunity to compose out loud by oracy.
Absolutely. And the psychology of the mini whiteboard, which you point to, is the framework advocates for the use of temporary low stakes drafting tools, precisely because of the emotional and cognitive tax of error correction. So when a child with transcription difficulties writes in a neat exercise book, for example, a spelling mistake or a messy, something that's been written messily, feels like a failure, and they often become paralyzed by perfectionism, writing slowly or refusing to use kind of complex vocabulary. So a mini whiteboard obviously removes the fear of that permanent mistake, doesn't it? Because it can be wiped away in a second. And Sophie's cognitive anxiety then drops as well because of those kind of low stakes tools. And by separating the routine into draft, refine, transfer to an exercise book, we match Kellogg's advice then, don't we? We decouple the creative formulation of sentences from that final high pressure execution of neat handwriting.
Yeah, obviously the challenge is executing this across the whole school at secondary. You've got all of those different subjects, and that's why it helps for a literacy lead to have a good oversight of how writing is addressed in each subject, and to know what is going on in each subject, sentence stems and so on, to be able to advise on that.
Well, the writing framework emphasises that literacy isn't just a job of the English department. It is a whole school responsibility, which is what you just stated. And because of because that year 7 student spends the majority of their day writing in other subjects, history, geography, science, RE, a transcription bottleneck will cripple their ability to show what they know across the curriculum.
Writing interventions can be invaluable, and we're told, like I said, that Sophie has responded well to these in years 4 and 5. You can imagine that Sophie may not be picked up for intervention groups because her ability to read well, her ability to talk may well act as a mask, but the writing framework proposes that small group interventions would be a good idea for someone working at her level. Her English teacher or literacy lead could plot her on the simple view of writing graph. We've discussed, do you use that as a literal graph to plot people on, and that is one way of using it. And that way it could be determined that she's a part of a cohort who find transcription challenging and provide additional support through that. All is not lost for Sophie. There are scaffolds that can be put in place to help her, but it is important that the work is done, and sort of done as soon as possible, I would say. We'd love to hear what strategies listeners have put in place for their own versions of Sophie. You can contact us on twinklpod@twinkl.co.uk to share your ideas. The Twinkl website, offers a range of writing intervention materials for working with learners in similar circumstances. You can find a list of links to those materials in the episode description. It's been lovely to chat again, Nicola. It's been a little while, so thanks for being here.
My pleasure. It's so nice to catch up with you, Sam.
And thank you to everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, leave a 5-star review to get the word out about this show. That's all for today. Goodbye for now.